Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Department of Energy has established a process for considering applications to export LNG. If the LNG would go to a country that has a free trade agreement with the U.S., the application is quickly granted. But if the LNG is going to a country without a free trade agreement, DOE does a public interest determination. That takes some time, but DOE has granted 7 of those applications so far. Dr. Gant, I'd like to ask you about how the Gardner bill would change this approval process. Everyone should understand what this bill would actually do. 24 applications to export LNG to non-free trade agreement countries are currently pending before DOE. Under the Gardner bill, what would happen to those applications?
Thank you, Congressman. Again, I've had the chance to only briefly review the bill, but as I understand the basic concept, it would grant status to WTO nations like that is currently granted to FTA nations under the Natural Gas Act, and in doing so would remove DOE's requirement to conduct a public interest determination.
So they would be granted without modification or delay.
If that is what the legislation instructs.
Okay. It's my understanding it does. So for these applications, there would be no public interest determination or analysis of whether the exports would have adverse impacts on domestic natural gas prices or consumers. Is that right?
As my understanding of the proposal is, yes, sir.
Okay. Automatically granting those applications would result in the approval of a total of 36 billion cubic feet per day in LNG exports. That's equal to almost half of our total domestic consumption. Has DOE done any analysis of how this level of potential exports would impact domestic natural gas prices?
Yes, sir. My understanding is that the capacity presented in the 24 applications that have not been granted non-FTA approval status is 36 BCF a day. The economic analysis that we've conducted to date does not consider exports at that level.
Okay. So these are just the pending applications. Under the Gardner bill, future applications to export LNG to any of the 159 World Trade Organization member countries, DOE would be required to just deem them in the public interest and grant them. Isn't that right?
Again, not being familiar with the specifics of the legislation. If there is no public interest determination required, my understanding is, yes, the Secretary would be required to deem them.
If there's no public interest requirement for analysis?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The WTO membership includes all likely importers, and the automatic approval doesn't depend on the proposed LNG export levels. Every application to export any amount of LNG to virtually anywhere in the world would be automatically granted under this bill. Dr. Gant, that's really just unlimited LNG exports, isn't it?
My understanding is if the exports were authorized, then market forces would determine how many LNG cargoes would actually be exported from the United States.
Well, as far as the government's concerned, virtually anywhere in the world, an application from anywhere in the world would be automatically granted under this bill. Market forces, of course, would determine other
yes, sir.
another factor. Okay. Is there any way under this bill for DOE to ensure that the total level of LNG exports will be in the public interest or will not have significant adverse impacts on domestic natural gas prices, consumers, and manufacturers?
Our current process considers these applications on a case-by-case basis and looks at the macroeconomic benefits and impacts of LNG exports. To the extent that we weren't conducting that review, we wouldn't be opining on that.
And is it your understanding the Gardner bill would not require that review?
Again, my very limited understanding.
Okay. I have an open mind on LNG exports, but I have concerns about this bill. Rubber stamping what I think is unlimited LNG exports without any determination that they are in the public interest could have serious unintended consequences. That's why many of the largest manufacturers in the country oppose this bill. Yield back my time, Mr.